Sorry.
And welcome to the Barre Beat Podcast, live from ASB Financial Studio Productions. Studios and Fly on the Wall Productions. You've got within tonight we have with us Alice Farrell and Sarah Hellman, and our special guest is Seth Keighley.
Yeah,
Keighley.
That works out. It's pronounced Keighley, but
Keighley.
Yeah, a lot of people say Keighley, and I'm not stickler on pronunciation.
Nice. Well, Keighley,
Yeah.
I will make sure that I say it correctly from
Appreciate
this point
that.
on.
Yeah.
So how you doing?
I'm doing great. Busy. I had a big slaughter this weekend, so I've been, arm deep in poultry all weekend. So that's been interesting.
I have experienced that once before in my life, and it's something that I would not do again.
Yeah, you get used to it after a couple hundred. It's not that big of a deal, but
you never get used to it. You never get used to it at all. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're running for?
Sure. I'm 31. I live with my wife, and we have 2 children. We live in Williamstown. I'm a glassblower, and that's been very nice to be able to support my family with art. It's been an interesting road through the pandemic, that's for sure, but I've been doing it for a while, and that's been good. A couple of months ago, I was approached by the Democratic Party. They were looking for someone to run for Orange 3, and we had spoken a little bit in the past. I had worked a little bit with Kate McLean to help her with her campaign, and my wife had done a little with her as well. And so they asked me if I was interested, and I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. I'm not super duper into politics, but I saw an opportunity to maybe make a big difference in my children's lives, and that was too important to pass up.
Nice. Yeah, it definitely is important. Like you said, making a difference, preparing the way for the future, certainly.
Yeah. Getting young people in politics is really, really difficult.
That's true.
Trying, yeah.
I started off when I was about 30 years old. I ran for school board. When I was like 20 or something, and failed miserably. Well, I did a write-in candidacy and obviously didn't get it. And then the school board said, no, thank you. We'll see what happens next year.
But you've been in with the Barre Council for a while, right?
I have. So I have been on city council, and it was funny. So you're running against Rodney Graham, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Which the first thing when I talked to you, the first thing that I asked was the hot dog guy.
Yeah.
Because I sympathize as a city councilor who wrote an ordinance to, enshrine cats as the gods of, past times, because we're doing some sort of exception for them. I get it. Those local politics can be a little bit fun and difficult. But that said, we're talking about, the state rep position.
Yeah.
And, you will definitely have an excellent opportunity to not handle cat ordinances or dealing with hot dogs.
Yeah, certainly. But there is a lot, for everything that's important that happens in the House and in the Senate. Sometimes when I look through the bills, I'm like, man, you guys spent a whole session deciding that, yeah, you definitely want to congratulate, the Eagle Scouts or something like that. I feel like some of those things could be a little streamlined maybe, and focus on some of the bigger issues that are really facing Vermonters. But, I think that's important, right, to recognize people's great achievements and all that. But to have a whole session about that, or to have someone whose focus might be, easy legislation like that, I think that's doing a disservice to people that are struggling in our state right now.
So we just want to let people know, if you're watching online, thank you for joining us, and we certainly want you to drop some comments in there asking questions. So the first question that we have actually comes from a panelist, but she texted it on the chat. Obviously, I wasn't paying attention to her, so that's her way of telling me. What does Orange 3 encompass?
So there was redistricting that just happened.
Mm-hmm.
So now Orange 3 is only Williamstown and Chelsea. Williamstown is the second biggest town in the county. So it's mostly, most of that voter power comes from Williamstown. But of course, Chelsea is significant.
Okay. So, and you live in Williamstown.
Yeah, I live right off the top of 64 on Palmer Road.
Okay. All right. I'm not entirely sure where that is.
It's got a great view. I get to look out on the valley. It's nice.
Nice. So we're just going to go right on over to our panelists, and we'll ask them if they have any questions for you. And Miss Alice Farrell does.
Yes, a great segue into a question that I have asked all of our candidates who have come on Barre Beat. And it has to do with the fact that sometimes our legislature, House and Senate, sometimes get carried away with the bills that they post or they would like to debate. And they become issues that are national or even worldly when we should be concentrating on the state of Vermont. And how would you, if you're elected, keep that thought in mind as bills are being presented? Are we saving the world or are we saving Vermont?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. On one hand, Vermont, doesn't have a role in saving the world by any means. But when we're talking about something like, decarbonizing or working towards a cleaner environment, those are goals that benefit everyone, even if they are a national goal or an international goal. So on one hand, I would not really try to push for things or spend time debating or take up valuable congressional resources on things that are not directly going to benefit or impact the life of Vermonters. We don't need to make some generalized statement about how inclusive we are without making any policies that, make sure that those things are being done in a correct way and are, being done in a way that's coincides with science and that, keep like you're saying, we want to keep in mind our Vermonters, but I think we want to keep in mind our least fortunate Vermonters as well. And I think a lot of those people that are marginalized in Vermont are similarly marginalized in the rest of the country. We might have fewer of them, and it might not be that as big of a deal as in some places. But I really believe that our society is as great as its least fortunate members. So to elevate those people is a good thing. But like you said, there's a lot of time and a lot of effort that's being spent on things that just really don't impact the average Vermonter, and that needs to change.
And that brings me to my follow-up question, which has to do with the carbon tax, because any kind of an addition to the cost of heating one's home or driving one's car here in Vermont could certainly highly impact those marginalized folks who are your people who are living at or below the poverty line, and some elders who are tipping into their retirement in order to just survive the inflation. So what's your feeling about a carbon tax?
Well, to start off, if you're referencing the Global Warming Solutions Act,
yes,
that was vetoed. There was actually, from my understanding, and I had quite a lot of conversations with Emily Long, who's the head of the House of Representatives, and Mike McCarthy, who's the House Whip, and looked through the bill, and I don't see it being a carbon tax, and they didn't intend it as a carbon tax. What is intended is a gradual progression that incentivizes a cleaner heat standard, which is designed to not only lower the cost for our least fortunate members, but also to insulate us from these price variations that are clearly a huge problem in fossil fuels. If we can do our best to bring our energy generation, to bring our thermal energy generation, to make sure that those resources are in Vermont, they come from Vermont, they stay in Vermont. Sorry. I see that as a benefit to Vermonters, especially when, you know, it's in the legislature's ability to specifically say older people, poor people, people who are really, you know, they're already struggling. We recognize these things, and we're going to make sure in the legislation that those people are protected from price increases, and that those people are not the ones who are going to be paying the lion's share of decarbonization. But the reality is that decarbonization is a global thing. If we're talking about electric vehicles, the vast majority of electric vehicle makers have pledged to either go full electric or partially electric or mostly electric by 2030, some even sooner. And the reality is we can say, well, we don't want to deal with that, but when there's X number of electric vehicles on the road, or when we need X number of heat pumps or whatever, we want to be ready for those moments. We want to have the infrastructure ready. We want to have our grid bolstered. We want to have energy production in such a way and controlled in such a way, or not controlled, localized in such a way where all of the dollars and cents spent to heat our homes stays here in Vermont.
All right. And Sarah, do you have a question?
I do. My question is about education. Should the legislature allow all parents to choose the school or educational program that best fits the needs of their children from among a wide array of providers, with their portion of education fund dollars following the child?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Sure. Should the legislature allow all parents to choose the school or educational program that best fits the needs of their children from among a wide array of providers, with their portion of education fund dollars following the child?
So it's a long
school choice.
Yeah, it's basically a long-winded question of, do you support school choice?
I think that in some situations, yes. In some situations, our schools are really overburdened right now. You know, staffing issues are a thing, and sometimes we as a legislator, I would think that we would want what's best for our children, best for all the Vermont children. So that's going to be the best education, but that's also going to be acknowledging that some of our best institutions have capacity that keeps them so great, and that maybe allocating some of those resources to our institutions that are not doing so great would help to bring up our bottom end of our standard. And I'm a big proponent of that. That's an interesting question. I would have to look specifically at legislation, and if I was involved in legislation, I would have to tailor it specifically to make sure that, like I'm saying, we're not overburdening institutions, but we're also allowing a reasonable amount of choice.
So, question for you. You had mentioned, and this is more of a personal question, you had mentioned that you had just gotten done slaughtering a bunch of chickens. Now, what do you do for a job specifically?
Yeah, I'm a glassblower.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's great. You know, I make art, and that's fun, and you know, I'm able to sell my art, which is a privilege. You know, I know a lot of artists. It's hard to be an artist, you know, but part of the reason why I'm able to do that, and part of the reason why I'm able to do the sort of things that I do is because we raise a lot of our own food, and we really, I heat our house solely with wood that I cut, and I do a lot of work to try and do what we're saying, insulate myself from market variations and
I was
protect
trying
myself,
to get to whether or not you had a farm, and that's kind of what I was wondering when you.
Some people think raising 200 birds a year is a farm. I don't.
Oh, I would.
I see it as homesteading.
Okay.
I raise chickens for me and my family. I raise turkeys for me and my family. Me, my wife, and I have gardens and blueberry bushes and all sorts of fruit, and we grow flowers and pumpkins and anything and everything that we can, and we preserve and we can, and we live off our chunk of land the best that we can, and I think everyone should, but it's not for everyone, and I also enjoy the connection with my food. It means a lot to me when my daughter's 3 and you say, Willow, where does meat come from? She says, well, meat comes from when we raise chickens. Yeah, that's great. I know a lot of people don't. Unfortunately, a lot of children, a lot of young people, a lot of people who are older than young don't really have that connection or really know where their food is coming from.
Nice. The reason why I was asking is because one of the things that is kind of leaving our society is that homestead kind of atmosphere, and it was intriguing to me. And as for the glass blowing, I've been up to the Stowe one, and it's absolutely amazing. Do you have like a studio at your house?
Yeah, and that's been
inviting the Barre Beat to come and watch, because I don't know.
It's really cool. I was hooked on the Netflix show Blown Away.
Yeah. I do a slightly different type of glass blowing. I do torch work. So I have instead of a big glory hole where they stick the whole thing in and everything, I have a smaller torch, and it's a little more detailed color work. Like I make a lot of. I still make a lot of cups and the things that you would expect, but I make like more detailed necklaces or pendants or beads. Those are popular, sculptures popular. And as far as having people come, my house is really, and my studio is really not set up for that, but I do public demonstrations, and I'll certainly.
You'll have to
let you know.
us.
Yeah. I've been wanting to do one here in Barre coming up, but we'll see.
So you should reach out to the Barre Partnership, because I'm sure that they're always looking for awesome events to do. Mm-hmm. So tell me, so you do something similar to, have you ever heard of Goldshaw Farm? No. Okay. They do a homesteading kind of thing, but it's a YouTube.
We've thought about that because, man, those guys, they do good.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. I mean, he used to work at National Life, and he's got a pretty extensive YouTube channel, which they just do geese or ducks. I think it's just ducks and chickens, and he's branched out into like some cattle and stuff like that, but it's very interesting. And like you said, your daughter knows where the meat comes from. Most of us, it comes from Price Chopper.
Yeah. No, the great thing is for my daughter, there's times like my wife has a little home daycare as well. We just do a lot of stuff. And she provides food for the daycare kids because there's times where she says, especially, we're getting a little bit past that now, of course, but in the summer, snack time would come and it would be go out and pick what you want. And the girls would go out and they'd be, tomatoes and tomatillos and berries and whatever they wanted, and they were just right there amongst the plants and saying, oh, look at this bug, or, that sort of stuff is, it kind of like makes me a little emotional because, it's real. It's real, like visceral life, and a lot of people don't get that. Yeah,
it takes a long time though to like really get a piece of property to where you can do all of that. My folks just sold their house in Barrytown, and that they were there for 31 years. and they had apple trees and a plum tree and grapes and blueberries and all these things, but it takes so much time to get those resources and those especially fruit trees and bushes to really mature and bear the amount of fruit that you can actually do something with it. So
especially unfortunately these days there's the droughts, the extreme temperature has impacted at least some food production, and it has impacted Vermont, which is interesting. And we've noticed as we're planning and we're planting things, we're not sure that we're going to stay at our house. I love the area, and especially if I got this position, I'm not looking to move out of Orange 3, or Chelsea is really appealing to me, but regardless, we still want to invest in our property, because just like you're saying, it takes a long time, and for us, for us to put in a fruit bush or a tree, which I do that for my wife for Mother's Day. We go to Horsefords and I say, I'll pick out what you want, and we go and plant a bunch of stuff, and if we move next year, then I hope that some other little kid, right, gets to enjoy that, and for me, that's worth it, even if it's not my family that gets to enjoy it, because we were lucky enough to inherit or to purchase a home that the previous owner had been thoughtful enough to plant some blueberry bushes and to plant some decent apple varieties and things like that, and we've been able to really benefit from that.
Nice.
And as a semi-homesteader, we don't have any ducks or chickens or anything like that, but we do have a 50 by 100 garden that for years we have been able to supply our family and our neighbors. And how are your tomatoes this year? Mine were awful.
Really? We had good tomatoes this year.
Oh, good. Because
we had a groundhog this year that was just the bane of my existence. I got to tell you, every squash flower, every single squash flower, he wouldn't let them grow at all.
That's when you have to take the shotgun and get rid of the groundhog.
Yeah. So and that's a great segue into some gun control.
Yes. So tell us what your thoughts are on gun control.
There's some thoughts or some movements in the world to ban guns. I'm not on board with that. Gun regulation, I think, to have a background check to make sure the person who's buying a gun is not, been criminally, tried and convicted of anything, I think is a good idea. Those basic standards are good, but and you live in Vermont and you live in the country, you better have a gun in your house. You just need to do it. So I think that the government's role in gun control should be increased education, increased availability of hunter safety courses, increased availability of gun safety courses. Not necessarily like you need to go, but I mean, for me, I don't know very many hunters who say to someone, "Oh yeah, just go out there without ever having shot at a target and go try shooting a deer." That's not a great idea. And unfortunately, there are people in society that don't even know what trigger discipline is, and they don't understand. This is a very, very powerful thing that requires a high level of training to be used correctly. So I'm not about gun control. I'm about gun education.
I love that. I admittedly know very, very little about guns, and I think I've only ever shot a little BB gun or a water gun. But I agree. I wish that there were more opportunities to learn about it, because, as a single woman living alone, I would like to be able to have that knowledge to be able to protect myself.
So regarding that, let me press on that regarding your comments towards gun control. One of the main pushes that you see is a push to ban they call them assault rifles. Generally speaking, the AR-15, which is not an assault rifle. It's Armalite Someone's gonna fix it or comment in the chat.
The manufacturer name.
Yeah. So, are you supportive of a ban on those type of guns, or you're just education across the board?
I'm definitely not supportive of a ban on those type of guns. In fact, I think that some of the bans on firearms in our country have already gone too far. And I'm going to say things that, might not be super popular, but I think that at a certain level of firearm, that's when we can start talking about licensure. When we're not talking about the single mother at home who needs to defend herself, when we're not talking about Vermonters at home who needing to make sure the bear doesn't get their animals, or wanting to teach their children about shooting, or wanting to go hunting or support themselves, those are not the sort of regulations those are not the sort of firearms I think we really need to have regulation on. Unfortunately, we have a problem of school shootings in this country, right? And unfortunately, that problem even hits home here. We've had gun threats locally multiple times, and I think that plays into a greater mental health issue, of course, but there's also it's everything's to the extreme, right? There's no fighting in school. Someone says something mean to you, you can't say, you know what, I don't like that, I'm gonna punch you out or something like that. There's none of that. People just jump right to the big guns, right? And when we're talking about firearms, right, when we're talking about firearm control, people jump right, to the AR-15 and I think that to have a registry of who has a weapon with that sort of capability, or maybe to have those people specifically trained to handle a weapon with that capability is a good thing. I would say that if you're sufficiently trained and can handle it, you should be able to purchase an automatic weapon. I think I personally don't really necessarily see the difference between modifying a weapon to make it automatic. If you can handle it, you're trained, and you're proven yourself to be an upstanding member of society, and you want to go shoot your machine gun, I don't care. That's my personal opinion. But clearly there's a problem with school shootings, and that needs to be addressed in some way, right?
All right.
So that's a great segue to a question about policing and crime in a more general terms. What are your thoughts on how to sort of solve this issue that's been growing with crimes and not just school shootings, but public people being shot? It's happening a lot more in Burlington. It's happening, and that always kind of trickles its way to these smaller communities. We've had some issues here in Barre.
Absolutely.
And the national view of police is not good. And I know that police departments are having a hard time filling positions to be able to safely police the community.
Absolutely. I am the opposite of most of my party, or perhaps the popular view of my party, where I'm for increased police funding. 100% going into, not 100% necessarily, but a lot of it going into increased mental health services for officers, increased training for officers, increased staffing for officers. We can't expect officers who are out there getting pushed to the limits constantly to be able to perform their best. We can't expect officers who are exposed to potentially traumatic situations to just walk away and not have a lasting effect on them and their career, and how they interact with the public. I think very, very few cops are quote unquote bad cops. There needs to be, in my opinion, accountability for the officers that repeatedly, use excessive force. I think there's a little too much internal investigating And if there was a larger focus on, like I said, mental health in our communities as well, then we could start to approach some of these mental health interactions where, there was police shooting of a mentally ill man in Burlington just a few years ago where the police, shot and killed him.
Same thing happened in Montpelier not too long ago, a couple of years.
These officers should be able to, at the drop of a hat, call and have a mental health resource officer there who's trained to deal with people and who's trained with dealing with these really, really intense escalations. But the reality is that clearly there's staffing issues at the basic level. So how can we say, well, why don't you just hire this super fancy mental health professional to come in and deal with everybody, right? So that's where I think increased funding comes in. I'm also a big fan as far as when we're talking about internal investigation or something like that. I'm a fan of auditing a lot of how money gets spent. I think that there's a lot of focus on tax cuts or budget cuts, and I think that there could be a lot more focus on efficiency. And by increasing the efficiency of our dollar, we can not have to pay more taxes, but we can get better services.
All right. And Alice, do you have a question? Would you like me to come back to you?
Yeah, come back to me. I'm
Okay.
absorbing all this.
All right.
I'm still stuck on tomatoes.
So I'll ask, as we're talking about police officers, one of the hot topics is qualified immunity. What is your stance on qualified immunity for police officers?
Can you describe what you mean exactly by qualified immunity?
So qualified immunity is where individual police officers can be sued for their action. And am I correct on that?
So qualified immunity is when, as a police officer is in the is doing their job, as with qualified immunity, they cannot be sued personally for carrying out the duties of their job.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it just gives a layer of protection to the police officer for when they make a mistake. So, for example, when, let's say, a police officer in error, I don't know, does something, and
Breaks
the only
your
thing
shoulder.
that they can, the only thing that they could sue would be the municipality or
Like
or
if
what
they're
have you.
arresting you and they, yank too hard on your arm and they, hurt your shoulder,
Certainly.
and arresting you.
Or in that case in Williamstown a few years ago where an off-duty cop pulled over people in a Jeep and shot out their back window.
That should not be under. If it was
That
off
would-
duty, I don't
if
think
if
that
they're
would
not
be
on duty,
qualified.
that
Should be
doesn't-
qualified
yeah.
immunity.
Okay, that's a good clarification.
Hopefully they were
yeah.
put into.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So on a certain level, once again, I think that's a nuanced question, right? If we have an officer that, they were looking the wrong way, or they were in the middle of something and there was a, fender bender, or if there was, like you're saying, there was some struggle and someone got yanked the wrong way and something happened, like that's one thing, right? But when we have officers that repeatedly use excess force, and we see things like $1 million, multi-million dollar, $10 million settlements at the expense of municipalities. That's a big deal. So, that's where I think that, having increased mental health services, and as part of those increased mental health services, having officers check up on each other and make sure, hey, I think this guy is really, he or this lady is really on top of their game, they're ready for duty, or hey, this person's really struggling right now. Maybe they need to take a back seat from them. Some of that stuff would be good.
And I think part of that is destigmatizing mental health services, because, when we think about mental illness, you think about somebody that, can't function in a normal society when there are people everywhere that struggle with mental illness. And I think some education around that to the community as far as what is mental health and how do you stay in a, just tell an officer like, oh, you should probably go to counseling on a regular basis to do your job well.
Mm-hmm.
That's not always going to go over well for everybody, but
and unfortunately, a lot of people that need mental health, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think a lot of the people that need mental health are not in a situation of feeling the self-worth that they maybe can go out and seek it, or they don't want to, like you're saying, they don't want to expose maybe something that they don't want everyone to know about, and that's where I think having it's no one's suggesting to you to go to do anything. If say you're a police officer, no one's suggesting to you that you go to counseling. No one's saying that you have any mental health problems. There's no thought that that's happening, but you have a stressful job, so let's talk about it.
No, I agree with you 100%. I worked in community mental health for 7-8 years. And so, but there's this sort of, I'm not even sure what to call it, but when you take a job as a police officer, you're expected to be tough, and you're expected to be, kind of have this shell where you can handle these situations. And, seeking mental health services can be perceived as being weak.
Mm-hmm.
And my personal opinion is that I think we need to find a way to get rid of that stigma around what those services can provide to somebody. And it doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're unable to perform your duties. In fact, you'd probably be able to perform them better in that role with that support.
I absolutely agree. I would also expand that a little bit, though. There's a really huge problem right now in nursing and in hospital staff, and there's a real need for some mental health support there too.
Absolutely.
You have a question there, Alice?
Yes. There are lots of opportunities in the legislature to be on various committees. If you were elected, do you have any particular committees that you would prefer to be on rather than others?
Well, of course, everyone wants to be in the important committees, right? So that would be great, but I'm not. Natural resources would be awesome, but not something I'm necessarily expecting. For me, I think a lot of my benefits and strengths can come from transportation, can come from energy. I have a background in some of things related to that, specifically as we do whatever we're doing with decarbonization. As far as we're going to go with that, or how fast we're going to go with that, I don't know, but that's what my specialty has been in the past.
So one of my favorite committees is GovOps. And for those that don't know, GovOps is basically the committee that handles charter changes for municipalities. Not sure how much you follow Barre City politics, but we recently had a charter change where we were making it so that the city, the municipality, not individuals within the city, but the municipality itself can only put up the American flag, the 3-4 city,
Vermont
state,
flag,
and POW MIA flags. But the question at hand is, if you were to get into that GovOps, how much deference would you put towards the municipality making the changes that they feel works for them? And not only like a flag policy such as that, but also when they make decisions, the municipality makes a decision to say 16 and 17-year-olds should be able to vote. What's your thoughts on 16 and 17-year-old voting, and how much are you going to say to the municipality, you may want that, but you're not getting it, I guess, kind of?
Well, with certain things, when we're talking about, when we're talking about 16 and 17-year-old voting, I think that that must be local only, right? Not
Correct. It was purely local.
Yeah, I have no problem with that personally, and from if I was on the committee that was talking to that, I would say, if you guys want to do it, that's your zone, go for it. I would say that about most things. Where that might change a little bit might be if we have some maybe controversy that's getting out of hand, or if there's really maybe an intertown, or there's maybe a couple select boards that don't necessarily see the same thing. What I wouldn't want to see would be some like weird battle of flags between two different politically affiliated select boards or something like that, which I don't see that happening. But I think that simple rules like I personally think that municipalities should only fly the American flag, Vermont flag. I didn't realize that also included the POW-MIA flag, but I definitely agree with that. That's an interesting question. There was a during the Black Lives Matter thing when it started, and people were starting to say Black Lives Matter, and George Floyd had just been murdered. There was a thin blue line flag that showed up in Williamstown, and it created quite a controversy. And I know that you guys had quite a controversy here in Barre too, was a pride flag. Was that what it was?
So here in Barre City, there was quite a few flags. It started off with a Black Lives Matter flag, and we ended up arguing about what flags to raise for about 6 months, and I decided that I would put forth a charter change to make it so that the city doesn't argue over flags anymore. All flags except for the standard flags that
which
the
I
state of
100%
Vermont
agree with. 100% agree with that.
Yeah, and it still allows people to put up flags on their property. On if you want to put up one of those flags on like your cemetery, you can do that as an individual, but the municipality itself cannot do that. So that's what that was about.
Yeah, and so your question is, if I was in this GovOps program, would I want to make that rule? Would I want to make that a statewide rule, or would I want to allow municipalities to decide that?
You would. So for us, it was, we put the charter change. It only affects us, but there were representatives that said, no, we don't want you to restrict in that way. And there was representatives that said, no, we don't want you to allow 16 and 17-year-olds. So the question is would you put a lot of emphasis on, this is what this community wanted, and this is local control, and they should have it? Yeah. I guess that's kind of...
Absolutely.
Okay.
And to be clear, right, that wouldn't...
So
there's nothing like environmental, right? Because like sometimes like a pollutant or an environmental thing can start in one place and migrate to another thing or something like that. So that, for me, that would be an exclusion, but I would assume that wouldn't be covered by GovOps anyway.
It could, well, I mean, technically, if a community passed an ordinance or passed a charter change to allow them to dump in the river, I suppose they could do that. So I'm guess you're going to go on the record and say that's a no for you. Okay.
Also, not a fan of dumping in rivers.
Yeah, not a fan of dumping in rivers.
Nor am I.
So, Alice has a question here.
Yes, I'm always interested in rural areas because people are, in some cases, few and far between, and not everyone has internet. And how would you, as a representative, keep in contact with all the folks in your district? Well,
as a state, we need to figure out our places that don't have internet. That's a big detriment. We're asking people to move in. Where the state offered people what $10,000 to move here and take some job, like, but we don't have the internet to provide. To me, that was a silly policy. But that policy aside, you know, I think that our mail carriers are really, really important resources. I think that, you know, our post office, particularly in Williamstown, you know, you're a small town. Once you get to know the post office, you know, if I have something that's left there, you know, Melanie, she's great. She sends us a message. She said, hey, we forgot this or something, or you forgot this, or hey, we had 10 extra chicks that no one picked up. We don't know what to do with these birds. Come pick them up. And I'm like, okay, sure. You know, to me, that sort of small town community connection is the best. That's why living in a rural place is for me. You know, I love that connection. And I think that building on those connections, building on those local resources, those people that are out there every day, seeing the people that maybe don't get out of their house, maybe the older people or maybe the less mobile people that you know, they can't just run down to the store, right? They can't just run down to, you know, or they don't go up to Burlington. You know, these people that are a little more isolated, to make sure that they're being reached and that their opinions are being heard as well.
And of course, you can always come on the Barry B podcast live from ASB Financial Studios.
Oh, I hope it's not the
Fly on
last
the Wall
time.
Productions. Absolutely, you're more than welcome to come anytime. So I appreciate you coming on the Barry Beat.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So talking about that local, you know, local feel, and I know that we always say this is our favorite stuff. What's your favorite creamy stand in the state of Vermont?
I mean, legendary and Williamstown is just
Yeah.
Can there be any hesitation? I don't think so.
Thank you so very much.
Does he know your
I
connection to that,
appreciate-
Michael?
I'm sorry, what?
Does
what
he
now?
know your connection to that?
He probably does not.
No, let me
That's
hear.
actually my brother's. The
Really?
legendary is my brother's, but the store is not his.
Yeah.
But the creamy stand is.
So is he doing all the maple production too?
Actually, my sister and my brother
I
also
love it.
do all the production there. He has some acreage up in Orange actually, and which I don't know why I said that, because
It's no longer
you're
part
not
of the
really
district.
one of your areas. But he has some acreage up in Orange, and my sister has some acreage in Brookfield.
Great.
So,
That's I mean, that for me, that's a huge part of it. You know, to know that and that just makes me feel so much better about it. I love that creamy stand. My wife was just saying today, she was like, wait, is the creamy stand closed? Like, can we go get one more? I was like, I don't think it's open anymore. So
yeah, it's closed.
Seasonal. Wah, wah.
So that brings me to my next question. That too is a great segue.
great.
Having gone, actually this past week I had the opportunity to drive down 302 through Williamstown and Orange on my way to a school board conference. But just the same, I bring the word from a really dyed-in-the-wool old-timer in Barrytown when I asked him one time about what would you like to have the legislature be involved with, and his answer was fix the damn roads. So infrastructure. What do you see about infrastructure in Vermont?
Yeah, infrastructure is just we're just really, really desperately in need of infrastructure, and I think infrastructure is one of those sectors where that efficiency, my thoughts on efficiency really come forward. You know, for a long time, there's been a lot of there's been a lot of acknowledgement that our roads are really not adequate. That, you know, some of our, like we were talking about, our internet infrastructure is not adequate. You know, we're talking about electric vehicles and the grid. You know, take electric vehicles out of it, our grid is inadequate, right? You know, our power production, Vermont Yankee was, you know, when they shut down Vermont Yankee, it was in need of such extensive repairs that it would have cost Vermonters more to fix the plant and keep going than it has to switch to buying our nuclear from New Hampshire. You know, we need to bring that money back into Vermont. We need to make sure that we're investing, and that all those jobs that are all that money that needs to be spent in infrastructure, because there's no doubt it needs to be spent, and it needs to be, regardless of where it comes from, like, it needs to be found, because for us to not have adequate roads costs us money. For us not to have adequate internet costs businesses money. And it happens every day, and especially in our rural areas.
So are you in favor of building a nuclear plant in Vermont?
Yeah. So long as it's done correctly, I am in favor of a lot of different alternative energy or renewable energy schemes. I think that localized production and storage at a local level is the future. I mean, for me, I don't understand the draw of sending our money overseas, or sending our money to other states, or over the border to Canada, when we're in desperate need of the infrastructure here. And yeah, in the long run, it's going to save money. In the short run, it might be expensive, but right now, Green Mountain Power, Washington Electric, every utility is just raising rates and projecting to continue doing that. We need to address this now before. I mean, things are already out of control, right? So, if the longer we let it go, it's just like the problem is just compounding, right?
Right. And Alice?
Through something that we have learned through, surprisingly enough, Barre Beat, having various candidates on, that there seems to be a tendency in the legislature for one particular party, and that would be your party, the Democrats, to dictate to their membership and their caucus how they should vote, with a little symbol on their desk with either yes or no as to how they should vote. Do you see yourself breaking out of that, and if necessary, budging against what might be a party line?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm running as a Democrat. I personally probably associate a little more as an independent. There's a lot of, especially nationally, locally here in Vermont, right? I really feel like the vast majority of our neighbors and our community members are good intentioned, and I really feel like the vast majority of our legislators are good intentioned. But I don't necessarily feel like falling right in line with them is my role. My role is to represent my constituents and to represent what I think is right. And especially when we're talking about, like you had mentioned earlier, maybe issues that are more performative. Hey, look how great we are on this one little thing that matters on a national scale, but really doesn't help that many Vermonters. That's not really the politics that I would like to play. I would like to get down to the real issues, like we're talking about. Hey, our roads are breaking. Let's handle this now. That would be my motivation. Granted, I haven't served in the House, and I understand that there's, a lot of politicking, which is part of why I was hesitant, to run, because that politicking, the campaigning, the I'm gonna spend this X huge number of dollars to make a slander campaign on my opponent, or to claim a bunch of BS that I'm not actually going to do. That's not what I'm into at all. I would rather just speak plainly, let people get to know me for who I am, listen to my constituents, and try and translate their needs and desires in plain speech in the House.
Thank you very much.
So, a quick question, which isn't going to be quick, I'm sure. And it's a hot topic that's happening right now, and it's very relevant. This November, people have already received their ballots. So, on their ballot is Proposition 5, which is the amendment to the Constitution for bodily autonomy. What is your thoughts on that? And as a representative, how will you represent in legislature on that particular issue of abortion?
I don't think the government should have so much of say of what we do with our bodies, and that involves a lot of things. I think that government overreach of women's bodies in particular has been a problem, and continues to be a problem. When we're talking about Act 5, right, it has a bit of that performative feel to it, right? You know, where there's it's going on all over the country. Like, well, we're such an educated state, you know, we're such a liberal state or something that we're gonna codify into law this issue. I think there's a lot of danger in the national rhetoric around women's bodies, and I think that if that's what's necessary here in Vermont to protect that half of our constituency, then I'm for it. I get worried when I hear about things like contraception bans. That, you know, to remove contraception and to remove abortion, you know, there are a lot of women who would be forced into pregnancies that they wouldn't want or couldn't handle.
All right. And we are pushing up against an hour. So, Sarah, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
I would like to ask, this is kind of an easy but kind of a hard question. If you had a magic wand and you could fix one issue that's plaguing Vermonters and just make it go away, what would it be?
Rising food prices. For me, rising food prices impact everyone, but they really, really impact our least fortunate members of society. And when your decision is to choose a cheaper or worse or less healthy food choice for you and your children, that's an investment that we're going to be paying for down the line.
All right.
Good answer.
And Alice?
I would just like to hear the final wrap up as in your conclusions on anything that we might have missed as a question that you'd like to tell us and tell your constituents who will be watching Barre Beat.
Why should they vote for you?
There's a bit of small town politics happening in Williamstown, where it seems like it's this group against that group, and well, this person said this and that person said that. I won't talk to this person, or I won't deal with that person, or whatever. I don't like any of that. I don't want to play into any of that. For me, there's no one off limits to talk to, and there's no opinion I'm not willing to hear.
All right. So, like I said, we're at an hour, and certainly want to give you your final opportunity to give your pitch. Just sell it, right? I'm really sorry. That's the 9 o'clock buzzer.
No big deal. So yeah, last thing, we're very close in Vermont at times to being able to override Phil Scott's veto. And in some situations, I don't agree with the overriding of the vetoes that Phil Scott has, enacted. But in some cases, just before the pandemic, there was a bill to provide insurance relief for missed paychecks. And man, that would have put a lot of money into Vermonters' pockets at a time when we really could have needed it, where we really could have used it. I could have used it, everyone I know that had a business was like, whoa, what is happening? Things were getting crazy and people were getting scared, and our legislature had the opportunity to make that better before it happened and didn't.
All right. So, thank you for joining us on the Barre Beat podcast. Thank you to our panelists, Sarah Hellman and Alice Farrell.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank
Glad
you so
to be
much,
here.
guys.
Absolutely. And Seth, we hope that you come back soon. Really appreciate. And if you get into the office, we hope that you come and give us a status update.
Regardless, I hope to be back soon.
Absolutely. I'll add you to the group of guests that can come as panelists.
Awesome.
And with that, I want to say thank you to everybody that's watching the Barre Beat podcast live from ASB Financial Studios and Fly on the Wall Productions. We will be here tomorrow night, 8 p.m., and we want to say thank you all, and you have a wonderful evening.